Dean, it's great to have you on the show. Looking at your background, you've got so many stories. I think we need a whole day, not 30 to 45 minutes. So let's dive in. Please let people know where you've been, where you're going, what you're doing. This is going to be great.
All right. Thanks, David. It's great to be here. My leadership story, I have to really cover it. I just have to take a quick, large step back in time, which is when I was in my early 20s, I was lucky enough to be exposed to what today would be considered a emotional intelligence training. And it was a personal training. So I was able to actually get a really good glimpse of what sort of drives me, what I'm made of, and what I can bring to the world at an early enough age. I wish I had done it when I was 15 or so and would have helped me in my teens. But I came out of there with a lot of understanding of soft skills, human connection, commitment, a lot of different things that I just sort of had heard about, but didn't really have a solid foundation in. And so when I went into public accounting, where I got my start, I was able to start using some of those skills in how I worked with people in business. And I did that throughout my career. I thought I was going to be a lifetime partner at Ernst, which is where I started, but I ended up being there for 7.5 years. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about company culture as we go through this discussion. But it got to a point where what had happened at the culture at Ernst, the change that was there was no longer really a right fit for me. So I left and I went to a 2.5-year stint at a small recreational industrial products company, Anthony Industries. I was the swimming pool group controller. It was one of our clients from Ernst. And the great thing about that was it was a small team. We all rolled up our sleeves. We all worked together and supported each other. And I learned how to add value from inside a company. And then I had
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, but Anthony Pools, I remember swimming in pools that had a little tile that said Anthony Pools on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we were nationwide. They started in Los Angeles, but we had, I think it was 9 construction regions around the country. And I learned how to build a pool better, cheaper, faster, how to do cash flow, how to deal with litigation for alcohol influenced, broken necks off diving boards. I mean, everything I got to touch and feel, which was great.
Wow.
And then I had, through a connection, an opportunity to interview at the Walt Disney Company. And that was a big change. And I think had I gone there directly out of public accounting, I would have been lost. But having been with this small team and learned all the different ways that I could contribute and how all the pieces fit together, I was able to go into Disney and really understand how to make a difference. And I think the key change for me was I had to start an internal audit. I was there for about 8 months, and then I was plugged into an opportunity where I became the director of finance for motion picture marketing. And suddenly I had to deal with creative types. I had to figure out how to do my finance responsibilities without getting in the way of the creative process. And I really had to figure out how to collaborate with these people so we understood each other's goals and how to support each other and not get in each other's way, yet I was still responsible for compliance and all those kinds of things. So I think that was where people realized that I wasn't just the finance police, and they realized that I was there to help them be better, help all of us be better at what we were doing. And that's when I think things shifted into high gear.
That must have been a real diversity of personalities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the interesting thing when you get into the marketing areas, marketing and distribution were 2 separate groups. So marketing didn't even have a P&L. All they had was a spend level. So they were evaluated on how many butts they got in the seats, how many people came to that movie opening, and then the rest was almost a formula after the opening weekend about how profitable that film would be. But if they didn't get the movie open, let's put it this way, if they got the movie open and it was a success, nobody would question if they overspent. So I came into that culture and had to figure out, okay, so how do we find ways to save? How do we do like volume vendor deals? How do we do creative ideas that will help get things done without getting in the way of getting the movie open? So yeah, I had to learn to work in a different way.
That's it. Fantastic. So what happened after that?
So I worked my way up to the CFO job, and it's interesting in Hollywood, probably in all companies, how things can happen. I was the number 2 to the CFO. Joe Roth was pushed out of the studio. Peter Schneider became the chairman, and the CFO was a gentleman by the name of Rob Moore. Now, I can't validate this, but what I've heard happened is Peter Schneider had been in charge of animation. So Rob called up Peter and said, look, you've been doing animation. I've been doing live action for all of my career. I think you should defer to me on live action. He's saying this to the chairman of the studio. And the chairman said, I disagree. And he hung up the phone. And my understanding is they didn't talk for about 2 weeks. And then Rob sent a note saying, we really can't continue to work in this fashion. And Peter said, you're right. You need to leave. And suddenly Rob Moore got pushed out. Peter called me up and said, you're my new CFO. So you never know exactly how things are going to play out. But, I'd say probably I had a little bit of the imposter syndrome as I stepped into that role so quickly, wondering how I can handle all those pieces. But, I figured at that point I was pretty good at figuring things out and asking people and not being afraid to say that I don't have the answer, because I'm a big believer that, especially in today's world, as disruptive as it is, we can't have all the answers. We can't see all the threats coming. We're going to be much better as a team than we are operating individually. And so I started that at Disney. I was in that role for about a year and a half. And then Fox came suiting me, looking for me. And I went over to Fox, and it was night and day, the difference in culture at Disney versus Fox. Disney was very corporate driven, brand, everything, everything, brand before everything. And just to a large degree, just get things done the way we tell you to do things, and very institutional like. Fox, very entrepreneurial. I walked in there the first day, chairman comes in, hugs me, says, you're the CFO. You can go to any meeting you want. You can get involved in any project you want. You do not need to ask permission, which was so refreshing, because at Disney, a lot of times I was being straight armed as the CFO, because certain business leaders didn't want finance in the way, because they perceived that they had a corporate strat planning group, which was a finance type group at Disney that was very much imposing themselves on the businesses. So all of finance basically just got this label that said, we don't want you in our way. So I was constantly fighting that. And at Fox, it was night and day. They welcomed finance's involvement.
And now I'm curious, Dean, did you find a way to work with those people that didn't want finance involved at all? I mean, because we all have occasional people on our teams that think they know more than other people and don't want the financial controls that sometimes are necessary for the business. Sure.
The people in the business units who had that sort of default of we don't want finance involved, I created relationships with them and I got involved, and we had very open dialogue. The interesting thing, if you want to know why I left Disney, was that strat planning group at corporate, they didn't change. And their unspoken message was, we're better than you, we're smarter than you, give us the information and get out of our way. And so if I wouldn't give them the information readily, they would actually lie to me and try to get things through the back door. And I mean, I felt like every single day I didn't know who I was dealing with and somebody was trying to take me out. And that strat planning group did not report to the CFO. They reported up through another gentleman who reported to Michael Eisner at the time. And the CFO saw everything that was going on. He was very sympathetic to what I was going through, and would stand up for me. But it was a cutthroat. It just wasn't a great culture. Put it this way. I tell people all the time now, find a culture where you can thrive. Life's too short. Find a place, first see if you can help shift the culture. But at the end of the day, if you can't thrive in that culture, why be there? And I had to follow my own advice at that point. And when Fox came knocking at the door, it was a pretty easy decision to leave.
Interesting. And so what was the Fox environment like, and what did you do to maximize it?
Well, there's good news and bad news about the entrepreneurial culture. When I came in, the bad news was there wasn't a lot of infrastructure. So Disney had like all these centralized groups and all these things where you would always know where to go to get something if you needed it, get something done. At Fox, the message was really like, well, if you have an idea, then try to build consensus around it and see if you can get some resources and see if you can start making it happen. There wasn't a group to go to really help you with that. So you really had to be resourceful, but you were starting from ground zero in a lot of ways. The good news about the culture was there was a lot of room to fill in the white space between businesses. So when I came in, two things that I did. One was there were a lot of really smart people, but not a lot of great leadership characteristics being displayed. So I came in and I connected with HR, and we figured out how to start training and developing people, start doing some workshops, we had the senior leadership team do 3 different workshops where we actually were doing 360s and hold them up in front of each other and talking about, what our positives and negatives are, how we can be better. People got emotional. We created a connection that we hadn't had before amongst that senior team. And it changed the way the conversation in the hallways would happen. Instead of just, trying to keep our information in our silos, we'd stop and start exploring ideas with other businesses across the different businesses. And we actually expanded, became more effective. I'm not saying it was just because of the leadership development we did, but I came into the company and Fox had some struggles, and we then went on a run and had 8 record years in a row and 9 out of 10. So something happened there. We had other help too. We had the explosion of DVD sales, but had we not been collaborating across the different businesses, I don't think we would have had the same result. And then the other area where I jumped in was, I think I was there for about a year, and Peter Chernin, who ran the broader Fox arena at the time, came up to me and said, we're doing all these video on demand deals and around the world, and I hope you're going to have our content ready to, in a digital format, to deliver to these platforms. And the first thing that went in my mind is, why is he looking at me? I don't know anything about supply chain and delivering things. But then I realized, again, we didn't have a lot of infrastructure. So I went to the chairman and said, I think I can drive this digital supply chain. And he said, go for it. So I pulled together people from all different areas of expertise because, like I said, I knew nothing about supply chain. And we figured out, and we had all these different business units that had controlled their own physical supply chains for decades. And it made no sense to have all these different digital supply chains. So we got everybody together and we talked through things, and we had everybody's input and got everybody engaged. And we realized that we all had one common denominator that we came up with, which was, it's ridiculous to create that master element for a TV show, for a film, whatever it is, more than one time. So let's figure out a way to create it once, and from that master, be able to create all the derivative works that we need to in order to supply all of our customers. And that was great. That was creating collaboration, getting everybody invested around a mission. But I'm writing a book, and this is a key story in the book. Well, I love parables. They're great, but they always kind of just magically end up where everything's wonderful. And life is messy. And I can sit here and tell you, we did the supply chain and we had alignment around the vision, even though we had to keep going back to it over and over again because people would get out of alignment. And it was messy. I had people who I called them double agents. They would tell me what we wanted to hear for this new group we had created for the centralized digital chain. And they would then go back to their division presidents and the business units and tell them a completely different story to try and undermine.
Did that intentionally, or was that by accident?
I think it was intentional, but I think it was their version of demonstrating loyalty. And they didn't know what to do. It's like they knew what we were building was absolutely fundamentally the right thing to do and the best thing for the company. But you had a division president they were reporting to that felt that every time you deliver an element, a film element, it's an opportunity to sell something else. And they didn't want to give that up to the centralized group. They wanted to control their own destiny. So they would go back and tell stories about things that were going wrong in the new group because their division president would look at them as, hey, they're loyal to me. They're telling me things that I could use, and they want me to win here. And it was obvious, but it was difficult because of the politics involved to get through some of that stuff. And we had some tough conversations along the way to get through it. But eventually we built a supply chain that became something nobody in the industry had. People had farmed it out. People had developed multiple chains. We had something where we built it in such a versatile way that we had an opportunity to use it for things we had never imagined. So for example, when we built it, we talked to the theatrical people, the first window in all films, and we were releasing Avatar. And Avatar, I mean, Jim Cameron is a perfectionist, and they were doing different things in all the different international versions. And the Russia version was not going to be ready in time to ship the prints, have them get through customs in Russia and get to the theaters. So we, through the technology we had built, were actually able to deliver it through the internet over a secure line into a duplication facility in Russia, strike the prints there and get them to the theaters. What Russia was not set up for was how to collect customs duties and things like that for electronic delivery. It would have cost us, I think the price was about $2 to $2.5 million to import those prints into Russia at the time physically. By delivering them electronically, we saved $2.5 million. And we were able to do that on films after that, and we were able to do that in other territories. So all of a sudden, we were heroes. We saved the day. It wasn't even about the money. It was just getting the film there on time. So people started looking at what we had built and saw how reliable it was and saw how good it could be. Most of the things that people were pointing the finger at where things went wrong, not all of them, but most of them were legacy issues of what that group inherited when we moved all the supply chain work into one group. One group was doing order entry by email. So you want to find out the status of an order, you had to go to the email chain and find out what was going on. There was no centralized order processing.
Yeah.
So that's what we were dealing with. So if an order would slip through the cracks, they go, up, see, this new enterprise operations group, they don't know what they're doing. But it wasn't what we had built. It's what we inherited.
It strikes me that I've known some people personally who are that way, where they're concerned about confrontation. And so they do that thing that you were mentioning where, they participate in your group or your conversation. And then when that conversation is repeated somewhere else, there's parts of it left out, or there's parts of it that are emphasized that are negative because they don't want confrontation with this other person or group. Very unhealthy. And yeah. I'm curious, you had all these people that were deeply entrenched in doing things a certain way. And you mentioned that you went and it sounds like you built on that soft skills knowledge you had going back to when you were in your 20s. And you built relationships first and had communication first. You didn't try to walk in and immediately tell them what to do. You kind of built from the relationship side. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. And again, going back to the way I say it is, we are better together than we are alone. Sometimes I was honest with myself and said, you know what, I'm probably not the right person to go have this conversation with that division president. Let me have my CIO, who was also overseeing the day-to-day operation of the digital supply chain, who had a great relationship with that division president as well. And it would be less, I thought, well, it'd be less political if he's talking to him about it than if I'm talking to him about it. So why doesn't he go have the conversation and explain, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, here's why it's better to have it over here. And we would strategize on who's the best person to have the dialogue. You're always looking for the path of least resistance, at least I think we are, but sometimes that can get you in trouble. But if you have a team of people and there's an easier way to have a conversation that gets you to the same place, I think that's okay. That's still transparent, that's still open. It just may not bring other issues into the room that you don't need to bring in the room.
Well, and I think that builds on what you're saying soft skill wise. And a lot of entrepreneurs get caught up in that the path of least resistance is I go do it because I can do it best.
Right.
But they have to learn how to delegate. And delegating means building up the people like you're talking about and then kind of figuring out who's the best person to handle whatever task. Now, I noticed in some of your information, if I'm remembering correctly, you built like a 9-month leadership program. Was that at Fox where nothing existed?
That was at Fox. After we did the leadership training for the senior team, I asked myself, okay, what do I need to do to build my own bench? And I just said, you know what, I'm just going to start connecting with people. So I took some middle management people on the finance team, and I literally just said, there were, I think, 5 or 6 of them the first time. I said, let's just have a breakfast for an hour every Tuesday morning. And we would sit down and we would just talk about life. what's going on in your life, get to know each other. Let's talk about politics, not national politics, but corporate politics. What's our strategy at the company? What are we trying to accomplish? And share information that they might not otherwise be exposed to across businesses. And then as I did those, I said, well, let me do some what I call discovery model exercises, which are the experiential exercises like I did in the training in my 20s, like I do in this program I have now, to give them a sense of how they play the game, to allow them to experience feedback in a way where it's not just intellectual, it's actually something they're experiencing. And through that program, I ended up, it would run, I think, 6 to 9 months. It was a loose, informal thing to start with. We would, at the very end, have them do a project that would come back and say, how do we save, and we had pretty good P&L, pretty healthy P&L. How do we save $5 million? How do we do better at recruiting and retention? And they would go and do research and talk to people and come back with recommendations. HR came to me after I did the third cycle of this, and they said, it's not fair you're doing this just for finance. You need to do this for the whole studio. And that was scary to me because when they were in finance, if they complained to their boss about the discovery model exercise because they were uncomfortable, ultimately that would come back to me, or I guess to HR. But if I'm doing it for the whole studio, then they're going to go to their division president, who's going to come to me and say, what are you doing with my people? Because they may not understand out of context what we were really doing. And I actually went to one of our senior staff meetings once, and our chief legal counsel for the studio, I had done this exercise where it's an exercise where we call it corporate lifeboat, and where you're actually in some way deciding who you're going to lay off out of the group. And they have to actually vote people off their own island. And the chief legal counsel guy thought it was a great process. He was raving about it. And all the people in the senior staff meeting turned and looked at me and they go, you're mean. Why would you do that? I don't understand. And out of context, they're all thinking I've lost it. But the reality was that these people knew it taught them how to give and receive feedback. It taught them how to have their elevator pitch about the value they bring to the company. It did so many things for them in developing and enhancing their leadership. So that program that was the early version of what is now my accelerated leadership program that I do through my company.
So if I'm understanding you, correct me if I'm wrong, you basically started these meetings on a relational note, mm-hmm. and then kind of progressed them to where you brought in some specific business things that you wanted them to learn or soft skills that you wanted them to learn. And then you started posing these exercises. Is that right? Yeah. It kind of works like this. The first 3 months, we do some exercises that give people input and feedback. They do 360s. They do a DISC or a Myers-Briggs. They go through this thing we have called the profitability game. Pre-COVID, they go do a ropes course, all building the team and seeing the way they operate. The second 3 months, we'd really spend time on giving and receiving feedback, doing that corporate lifeboat thing, lots of things that would really have them start digging deeper into their level of connection. And to the point where what we try to do in each program is get where they take accountability and responsibility for each other. They push each other to be better. Once they do that, I'm just giving them the framework, and then they start running with the program on their own. They start reaching out to people in the program and on their own giving and receiving feedback so that they can clear the air if they need to keep things moving forward. And sometimes I have to get involved in helping that along because there's a reluctance, there's a level of discomfort about that. And then the last 3 months, they actually do projects for company or industry issues that they're trying to solve, real world issues. And then they come back and present to upper management. Now, when they're doing those projects in the last 3 months, are they checking in with you every week or two and getting some mentoring, coaching type of thing?
Yeah, we're doing that. Along the way during the program, we have guest speakers come in so that they can get the right insight in areas that they're looking at for those projects. And we are working together. And then they do, I guess you call them dress rehearsals, where they actually present before they do the final presentation, and they get feedback on presentation and presence. And we try to give them whatever resources, give them access to whatever resources will help them solve their issues. So over time, the program, the projects got more and more robust, and these are within the company. So a couple things happen. First of all, because you're bringing people into these teams from different parts of the company, oftentimes you're getting a fresh look at things, because if I ask home entertainment at Fox to give us a presentation on something, I'm going to get that presentation with a home entertainment bias to it. If I have a cross-functional team, they're going to come in and they're going to present what they think is best for the company as a whole. And so our chairman said it's some of the freshest thinking I've seen in years when we did it. And the nice thing that comes out of the program, because we do this program within a company, is not only do the people grow and develop, they form a network within the company of mutual trust and respect. They learn how to engage their troops more effectively. So they create stickiness and loyalty in the company because they all have a voice. They feel that what they do matters in the company. And then the company, like I said, they get the benefit of that trusted network, but they also get the benefit of getting insights on how to deal with some of the real world issues they have on the table. So it's a win-win all the way around.
I love it. So I understand how you do that within an organization. And then when you're doing your training today, are you grouping people from different organizations?
I'm not at this point. At this point, I'm still doing it within an organization. I've thought about whether I want to do that. There's probably just as much value for the individual in terms of their own personal growth, and they could certainly do projects and things. So from the participant side, I probably could create as much value. But when an organization is also getting the value on the back end, then there's a value proposition that's very different for them in terms of why they would want to do this program and invest the money to do it.
Yeah. I can see how it would really work, and it would be valuable that way. I don't want to go down too deep of a rabbit trail, but you mentioned something early on. You said that you went through this experience of like an emotional intelligence training or test about 20 years old. You wish you'd done it at 15. One of my things is I would love to see American schools change the way we're teaching, and would love to see them do something in middle school, high school that was soft skills training that kind of builds on what you've said. I'm curious whether you've had any thoughts about that and the impact it could have on young people, on our nation, whatever, if we taught those types of things of being aware of ourselves, but also building those soft skills of leadership and teamwork and time management and goal setting and the rest of it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I did the training that I did was back then they called it self-awareness training. It was a company called LifeSpring. And I did the training. I did 2 5-day intensive trainings and then actually worked for the company for a year. So I had additional exposure to it. They were doing a training at the time called the family training. And parents would come in with the kids, I think probably from age, 8 on up. And you would see how these kids would understand these concepts in a fun, playful way and start to engage differently and start to communicate differently. And I've stayed in touch with a number of those people through their lives, and I see the impact that it had. So I think it would be, I hadn't given it any thought personally, but I think it would be a huge value to bring. I'm at Pepperdine right now for the first time teaching my own curriculum, first time I've ever teaching a class. And they came and asked me to teach, and they put me in a class that's media and entertainment finance, which makes sense based on my background. But I said, I want to bring a leadership component to it. So I'm actually taking some of the discussions and some of the exercises from my leadership program and doing them with the class. Because like I say that the missing piece in most organizations is that they don't develop the leadership of their people. And so they get suddenly into a role where they're responsible for overseeing a team and nobody's shown them how to do it. So I figure, you know what, these people are MBAs at Pepperdine, but they're in roles and they're going to get new roles. They're probably early days in leading teams. Why not teach them while they're a sponge? As opposed to what happens oftentimes is people go to get further down their career. And then they start saying to themselves, well, the way I've been doing things, even if it's been individual performance, the way I've been doing things has worked for me. So I'm not going to let go of what I'm doing. But when you start overseeing a team, to your point, where somebody might say, well, I'll just do it myself, doing it, good luck if you're overseeing, 100 people trying to do everything yourself and trying to keep everybody engaged and feel like what they're doing in the company matters. So I'm trying to give them that insight now so they can develop their team, create connection, learn how to keep people engaged, learn how have constructive feedback loops so everybody's constantly supporting each other and improving. So to your question, if you could start all that at an earlier age and people could come in and come out of school with that experience, I think it would make a huge difference in the way that people work in the world.
Yeah, it sounds like a fabulous class that you're doing at Pepperdine too. I mean, I wish I was back 22, 23 years old, could be sitting in your class and joining in that. That would be awesome. You said something before the podcast too that I want to bring up and see if you want to build on. And as we kind of close out here, because I think if you would allow it, I could sit and talk to you all day. But you said something really simple. And I wanted to bring that up to the audience. You talked about that we would never put someone in an accounting role who was not trained to be an accountant. Why then, throughout America in companies of all kinds of sizes, do we constantly put people in a leadership role who's had no training on leadership? Could you talk about that, please?
Yeah. First of all, it was another thought leader out there whose name is escaping me that I heard say that. So I'm not going to take credit for it, but I think it really does paint the picture. We spend so much time through school, through training, and it goes back to what you were saying, I think, about the exposure in elementary school or junior high in terms of how we're developing our people in school. They don't get that exposure. They don't get that experience of being developed. And we're teaching them how to be individual performers. It even goes so far as to how we tell people, don't look at anybody else's paper. That's cheating, right? Yet we then later want people to somehow, through osmosis, learn that it's good to work on a team and share ideas and develop each other's ideas. So I think they get trained to be strong individual performers. Maybe accounting is a great example. And then they get an accounting job and they know how to technically be a great accountant. But when it comes time for leadership, they're starting from scratch. And so, like I said, for me, I love working with people that are just starting to lead teams because you can catch them before they start forming fixed beliefs and having fixed behaviors about leadership based on what they assume, as opposed to learning what really works. And they're like sponges if you get them then. They want to know great ways to do things. Otherwise, like I said, they can get down the path and feel like, hey, what I've been doing has worked, so I'm just going to keep doing that in terms of individual performance. So, train and develop them. And there's that old, it was a cartoon drawing I saw first, but I'm sure the story is out there. There's the CFO that goes to his CEO and he says, what if we train these people and invest the time and resources and then they leave? Because a lot of people are fearful that if you train them and improve them, then they're going to be more marketable and they're going to leave. And the CEO said, yeah, but what if we don't train them and they stay?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It is amazing to me, the loyalty that when we did this accelerated leadership program inside Fox, the loyalty it created amongst the people. How many people said, this is the best thing I've ever done at the company. I love this company, the way the company has invested in me. They felt it. It mattered to them, and it made all the difference in the world. It's not just who's going to pay me the highest salary. I'm not saying you're always going to keep them, but the culture and investing and developing your people and having that connection, that matters. That counts for a lot.
Yeah. Did you ever see the book, The Dream Manager?
No.
It's a simple parable book, but the gist of the book is that you invest in your people, and if they leave, you consider that a blessing because you help them along their journey versus you're trying to lock them down and micromanage everything. I'm simplifying and not really giving away the story, but it's a fun little book, and he makes his point very well. But Dean, as I said, I could talk to you all day. I'm going to wrap it up.
It's fun.
And I want to encourage the audience, before Dean reminds us of his contact info, which we'll have on the podcast info anyway. But I think this is a very unique offering that Dean's doing. And I think that I don't want you to be enamored with the Disney and Fox names, because I love your experience. I love what you've done. And I'm confident that if somebody is looking for something to build their leadership, you're doing something very unique. And Dean, how do they learn more about your products, your services, what you're doing, or get a hold of you?
I mentioned two things. So you can go to my website, which is hallettleadership.com. Easy enough to remember, 2 L's, 2 T's. And I'm also writing a book that is probably still a couple of months away, but it is Accelerated Leadership. And it's how successful companies develop high performance cultures. And it really is, it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it really tells the story of the leadership program that I do and how it is woven into my journey, whether it's building the digital supply chain, whether it's how I've trained to develop people, whether it's some of the war stories that I've had in my career in terms of what I had a section I was going to call the Tales from the Dark Side of Leadership, but I thought, that might not be that appreciated, but there are stories in the book that talk about how not to do it. And it seems so obvious when you look at it, because every leader leaves a wake. Even it's a good wake or a bad wake, but every leader leaves a wake, and some leaders have no idea the impact that they're having on their people. So the book dives into a lot of that. So yeah, either the book or directly on the website.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great, and I hope we get other conversations to connect.
Terrific. I've really enjoyed it, David. Thanks.